December 1944. The war in Europe was dragging itself into another winter, one colder and hungrier than the last. Cities across Germany lay in ruins, railway lines shattered, villages reduced to hollow shells. For civilians, survival meant scraping frost from potatoes, roasting chestnuts in secret, boiling nettles for soup. Even the Wehrmacht, once fed by an iron machine of logistics, lived now on thin rations, black bread heavy with sawdust, watery cabbage broth, or nothing at all. But for the women who had been captured, auxiliaries, clerks, nurses, civilians swept into military zones, survival looked different. They now lived behind barbed wire in American-run prisoner-of-war camps scattered across Europe. The women had been herded into these compounds in the months following Allied advances. They had braced for brutality, believing the stories drilled into them by propaganda. Americans would humiliate, starve, and perhaps worse. Instead, what they found was monotony. Daily roll calls, straw mattresses, soup lines. There was hunger, yes, but not the gnawing famine their families endured at home. And there was shame. Heavy, inescapable. The shame of defeat. Now winter had wrapped the camps in its icy grip. Wind sliced through gaps in the wooden barracks, rattling tin roofs. Frost crept across windows, crusted on boots, and turned breath into pale ghosts that lingered in the dark. At night, the women huddled together, whispering in German about home, about children, about a world that felt unreachable. They expected nothing from December but cold and the grinding ache of captivity. But on the 24th, something shifted. It began with smells. Not the sour tang of cabbage stew, not the burnt odor of weak coffee substitute, but something richer, heavier, almost overwhelming. Roasting meat, fat sizzling, spices, pepper, sage, nutmeg, curling through the air. The women stirred restlessly in their bunks. Whispers rose. "Do you smell that?" One girl, no more than 20, pressed her face to a crack in the wall. She could see smoke rising from chimneys near the camp kitchens, thicker than usual, curling in fragrant plumes. She whispered to her bunkmate, "It is Christmas Eve." The words were heavy, almost forbidden. For years, Christmas had been swallowed by war, stripped down to silence and hunger. The Americans, it seemed, had not forgotten. By late afternoon, the camp buzzed with tension. Guards moved briskly, hauling crates, shouting orders. Some prisoners speculated grimly. "It is a trick. They will mock us, feed us scraps, laugh while we beg." Others shook their heads, too weary to imagine mercy. The sun dipped early, as winter suns do. Shadows stretched across the compound, barbed wire glinting under floodlights. Then came the call. Groups of women were ordered to line up to follow guards toward the mess hall. They moved in silence, boots crunching frost, eyes wide with suspicion. The mess hall, usually a place of thin soup and silence, had been transformed. Tables were cleared and scrubbed. Lanterns glowed against the walls. Candles flickered, casting golden halos over rough wooden planks. The smell struck first. Roasted turkey, buttery potatoes, cornbread, pies cooling on trays. For a moment the women froze, staring as though they had walked into a dream. An American chaplain stood at the front, Bible in hand. He spoke in English, words they barely understood, but his tone was soft, solemn. One German interpreter translated, "Tonight we remember peace, even in war. Tonight we give thanks." The women lowered their eyes. Some clenched fists, resisting the swell of emotion. Others already felt tears prickling. Then came the plates. Soldiers, some barely older than the prisoners themselves, carried trays heaped with food. Turkey, its skin glistening golden. Mashed potatoes drowned in gravy. Bright red cranberry sauce, jellied and trembling. Rolls of bread, soft and steaming. Slices of pumpkin pie dusted with cinnamon. The first plate was set before a prisoner named Marta. She had been a secretary in Munich, captured while fleeing west. Her hands shook as she stared at the plate. She whispered, "This cannot be real." But the smell overwhelmed her. She lifted a forkful of turkey, tasted the fat and salt, and burst into tears. The fork clattered against the tin. She pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing. Others followed. Forks scraped, spoons clinked, muffled weeping filled the hall. Some women ate in silence, chewing slowly, reverently. Others devoured every bite, tears streaming unchecked. A young girl whispered, "I thought I would never taste butter again." Another murmured, "This is the best food I have ever eaten." The Americans moved among them, refilling cups with hot coffee, offering seconds with awkward smiles. They spoke in English, joking to one another. To them it was duty, routine, even a small comfort from home. To the prisoners it was a revelation. One soldier muttered to his comrade, "Look at them, crying over turkey. My ma cooks this every year, I'm sick of it." His friend shrugged. "Guess it means more when you ain't had it in years." For the women, every taste was a storm of memory. One remembered goose dinners with her parents before the war, her father carving meat under candlelight. She sobbed openly into her potatoes. Another recalled Christmas markets in Frankfurt, the smell of roasted nuts and mulled wine. She whispered, "It is like a ghost has come back." Shame accompanied every bite. To eat at the enemy's table on Christmas, to weep into their bread, felt like betrayal. Yet hunger and longing drowned pride. They ate until their bellies ached, until butter and gravy smeared their lips, until their tears fell freely into empty plates. When the candles burned low, the chaplain spoke again. His words were simple, translated only partially. "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men." The women stared at their hands, at crumbs, at nothing at all. Later, in the barracks, silence reigned. Not the silence of despair, but of shock. Women lay on straw mattresses, bellies full, hearts heavier than ever. One whispered into the dark, "Why would they feed us on their holy night? Why us, their enemies?" No one answered, but the question lingered, pressing against the cold walls, heavier than hunger had ever been. Christmas morning in the camp dawned grey, with frost crusting the barbed wire and the distant hum of generators filling the air. For the women, the night before had been so surreal that some convinced themselves it had been a dream. Perhaps they had imagined it, the turkey, the butter, the pie. Perhaps the smell of roasted meat and the warmth of candles had been conjured by hunger playing cruel tricks. But when the women were called again, herded toward the hall in small groups, reality returned with its unmistakable proof. The smell hit them first, turkey fat crisping in ovens, potatoes whipped with butter, rolls warming in baskets. A sharp sweetness floated in the air, cranberry sauce, spiced cider, pumpkin pies cooling. Inside the hall, long tables stretched end to end. Soldiers moved quickly, carrying trays piled high. Candles flickered again, though daylight now streamed faintly through frost-lined windows. Each prisoner was seated, a plate set before her. The shock was total. One young woman, Ingrid, stared at her plate as though it were alive. Turkey meat, moist and steaming. Potatoes blanketed with thick brown gravy. A dollop of cranberry sauce glowed red like jewels. A soft roll glistened with melted butter. Beside it, a slice of pumpkin pie dusted with cinnamon. Her throat tightened. She whispered to the woman next to her, "This cannot be for us." The other woman, Gertrude, shook her head, eyes already brimming. "It is," she said. "It is Christmas." The first bite came hesitantly. Ingrid lifted a forkful of turkey to her lips. The taste, savory, tender, salty, exploded on her tongue. Tears welled instantly. She had not tasted meat like this in years. She pressed her napkin to her face, sobbing as quietly as she could. All around her, the same scene played out. Women trembled as they tore into soft rolls, pressing butter to their tongues and closing their eyes as if afraid the taste would vanish. Some ate quickly, shoveling food with frantic hunger, terrified it might be taken away. Others moved slowly, reverently, savoring each bite as though stretching time itself. The Americans looked on, half puzzled, half amused. To them, this was just Christmas rations, nothing extraordinary. Turkey, potatoes, pie. Some soldiers even grumbled. One corporal muttered to his comrade, "Back home I'm sick of turkey by the 26th. Can't believe they're crying over it." His comrade shrugged. "They've been starving for years. Guess it's different for them." For the women, every mouthful unlocked memories long buried. One prisoner, Elsa, tasted cranberry sauce for the first time. She recoiled at its bright red color, whispering that it looked like blood. But when she tasted the tart sweetness, her eyes widened. She laughed, then sobbed, clutching her fork with shaking hands. "It is sweet," she whispered, as though it were a miracle. Another woman, Lotta, broke her roll in half, staring at its steaming center. She inhaled deeply, remembering Christmas markets in Berlin, the smell of baked bread mingling with pine and smoke. She bit, chewed, and covered her mouth with her hand, weeping silently. "It tastes like my childhood," she confessed to no one in particular. A nurse named Katerina pressed her face into her mashed potatoes before lifting the first bite. She told the woman beside her, "My mother made this once. Only once. Before the shortages. I never thought I would taste it again." She cried so hard she could barely swallow. Even pie, alien to many, became holy. Some had never seen pumpkin, let alone dessert so sweet. A slice placed before Greta made her laugh through tears. She took one bite, then another, then whispered, "This is the best food I have ever eaten." The words trembled out of her before she realized she had spoken them aloud. Shame tangled with gratitude. Eating so well at the enemy's table felt like betrayal. Yet hunger and the weight of memory were stronger. Each woman sat caught between two worlds, the one she had believed in, where Americans were monsters, and the one before her, where Americans poured coffee into her tin cup and told her to eat as much as she liked. The chaplain spoke briefly, giving thanks. His words, haltingly translated, cut deeper than the food. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. For women who had been told only of vengeance and hatred, the phrase felt unbearable. That night in the barracks, the air was thick with whispers. Some clutched crusts of bread they had saved, unable to throw away a single crumb. Others lay on straw mattresses, hands on their full bellies, whispering to one another about what they had eaten. I thought I would never taste butter again. The cranberry was strange, but I cannot stop thinking of it. Why would they do this? Why us? The question lingered like smoke. Some argued it was strategy, that the Americans sought to humiliate them by feeding them like children. But the truth of their bodies betrayed the lie. Mercy had filled their stomachs. No cruelty followed the meal, no mockery, no punishment, just food, freely given. The irony was sharper than hunger. At home, their families starved in ruins. Here, behind barbed wire, they had eaten better than in years. The humiliation came not from cruelty, but from kindness, that revealed betrayal by their own leaders. Over the following days, the women could not stop speaking of it. They recounted the texture of turkey skin, the warmth of rolls, the sweetness of pie. They laughed, embarrassed by their tears, but the laughter cracked into sobs again. One woman, Sophie, wrote secretly on a scrap of paper, "I thought captivity would break me, but it is kindness that has undone me." The Americans, for their part, shrugged. They moved on, clearing tables, joking about leftovers. A soldier wrote home, "We fed them turkey and pie. They cried over it. Hard to hate them when you see that. They don't look like enemies when they're laughing over bread." The memory, however, burned deeper for the women. Christmas had not brought freedom. They were still captives, still cold, still far from home, but it had brought something they had thought impossible, a taste of mercy. And in the silence of night, lying awake on straw pallets, many whispered the same question, heavier than hunger had ever been. If the enemy can show mercy, what else have we been lied to about? The days after Christmas slipped back into their familiar rhythms. Roll calls, chores, soup lines, frost gnawing at the edges of the barracks. Yet something had changed. The women carried it inside them. The memory of warmth, of bread soft enough to steam, of turkey that dripped fat onto their tongues, of pie sweet enough to make them weep. It had been one night, one meal, but it was enough to shift something deeper. Faces softened. Bellies, for the first time in years, had been filled beyond aching. Some of the prisoners even laughed the next morning, not bitter laughter, but something fragile, almost shy. The guards noticed. "They look different," one GI muttered, "like that turkey put life back in them." Another replied, "Crazy thing is, we complain about the food, they treat it like treasure." Letters home preserved the contrast. Private from Ohio wrote, "We had our Christmas dinner in camp, same as always, turkey, potatoes, pie. But the German women prisoners cried over it. I never thought I'd see that. Makes you wonder if we're more alike than different." Another soldier scribbled, "I'll never forget the way one girl kissed her roll before eating. Just bread, but to her it was gold. War is strange." For the women, the meal became legend inside the camp. They recounted it over and over, each woman telling her version. One remembered the cranberry sauce shimmering red like a jewel. Another described the way butter slid across her fingers. A third whispered, with shame and relief, that she had eaten until her belly hurt for the first time in years. Some admitted that kindness cut more deeply than cruelty. "If they had beaten us, we could hate them," one woman said in the barracks, her voice low. "But how do you hate someone who feeds you pie?" The others nodded in silence. Pride battled with gratitude, but gratitude won more each day. The chaplain's words, "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men," lingered longer than the taste of gravy. They whispered about them at night, though not all dared to repeat them aloud. Those words had cracked the certainty of everything they had been told, that Americans were merciless, dishonorable monsters. But monsters did not serve turkey on Christmas. The irony grew unbearable when women thought of home. Letters, when they came, spoke of families scavenging through rubble, of children crying for bread, of men wasting away in ruined cities. To be fed so well in captivity while their kin starved outside the wire was a guilt heavier than chains. And yet, none could deny the truth of their own survival. Christmas had done what war itself could not. It humanized both sides. The women saw the soldiers not as faceless guards, but as young men who laughed awkwardly, while pouring coffee, who teased one another as they passed rolls, who scribbled letters to mothers and sweethearts back home. The soldiers, in turn, could not unsee the tears that streaked across enemy faces at the sight of pumpkin pie. One officer noted in his report, "Morale among female prisoners improved markedly following Christmas meal. Incidents of unrest decreased. Food appears to have a greater psychological effect than discipline." Cold, bureaucratic words, yet beneath them lay a truth larger than policy. Mercy fed not only the body, but the soul. Weeks passed, but the memory remained alive. Women saved scraps of crust, tucking them under blankets, holding them as tokens. Some pressed crumbs to their lips before sleeping, unwilling to let go of the taste. Others whispered prayers of thanks, though they did not know to whom. By spring, whispers of surrender reached the camp. Rumors of Germany's collapse spread like wildfire. The women braced for worse, expecting punishment, harsher treatment, perhaps abandonment. But instead, dawn still came with bread, soup still came with meat, and guards still spoke with the same weary indifference. The Christmas meal had not been a trick. It had been real, and its memory continued to warm them even as the war staggered to its bitter end. Years later, survivors would speak of that night more vividly than of battles or marches. One woman, interviewed in the 1970s, said softly, "I did not cry when I was captured. I did not cry when they marched us through the ruins. But I cried into mashed potatoes on Christmas night, because it was mercy, and I did not know what to do with mercy." Another, older now, smiled faintly through tears. Pumpkin pie. I had never seen such a thing. I thought it was a joke, but it was sweet and I wept. To this day I cannot taste cinnamon without remembering that night. A third recalled. It was then I knew we had been lied to, because the enemy fed us better than our own had in years. For the Americans, too, the memory endured. Diaries spoke oars. It, letters home, captured its strangeness. A private wrote, "Hard to call them enemies after that. They looked like us, just hungry." Another admitted, "I'll remember their tears more than the food itself." The war ended, but Christmas night remained. For the women, it became proof that mercy could pierce propaganda. For the soldiers, it was a reminder that victory was not only in battles won, but in kindness shown. On that December night, the German women had expected chains, silence, and hunger. Instead, they found themselves seated at tables lit with candles, plates heaped with food they had not tasted in years. They wept into turkey, laughed through tears at pie, kissed rolls of bread as though they were relics. It was not freedom. It did not erase the war or the shame of defeat, but it revealed something their leaders had denied and their propaganda had hidden, that mercy could come even from enemies. The memory outlasted the hunger, outlasted the wire, outlasted the war. And so, when they remembered captivity, they remembered not only the fences or the frost, but the night mercy arrived on Christmas, served on tin plates, passed across tables, carried on the warmth of turkey, bread, and pie.